everyone, welcome to me trimming the picture. This isn't the exact same one that I threw. It's a little different. It's a different one from the same batch. I'm trimming on a chuck, and once people have it on there, sometimes the way that they do is they'll hold their finger, and they'll be able to feel the spot that's sticking out and kind of push it over. Or if you just have a really good sense of exactly where the middle is, you can just sort of collar it into that position. There's a little bit of dampness to my chuck, but not a lot. And I don't really have anything holding this in place. So what I'll do to start is I'll just trim a tiny little divot right in the middle as my step one. And then I'll just keep one finger there basically the whole time with only a slight amount of downward pressure, not a lot. And that'll help keep it on center. And the other thing is while I'm trimming it, I'm never really using a lot of pressure. I don't want to push my piece off center. Fortunately, this is well thrown, so it has a pretty central center of gravity. So long as I don't speed or stop the wheel abruptly, and so long as my tool doesn't catch, it'll just stay in place just fine. So let's talk about trimming a little bit. I'm using a bison tool. Tools are awesome. You can look them up online. They're super, super sharp and they never go dull, and I love them. They're a little expensive, but they're just the absolute nut. So with trimming, I don't have a lot to trim on these, but I need to trim, a nice foot. And I will trim this whole outer area. Now, I'll probably level off the top in a few minutes, but you always want to trim the outside before you trim the inside. In a perfect world, I would have let this dry a little bit more before I trim it, but kind of in a rush today, so now is just when it's going to happen. The other thing too is whenever you're doing attachments, like this is I'm gonna be attaching a handle onto it. Whenever you're doing attachments, you do kind of want to trim them when they're a little on the softer side. You want to trim them as soon as possible because you want the clay to still be soft when you do the attachment. And that's true whether it's a pitcher and you're just putting a handle on, or a coffee mug, or a teapot where you've got a spout to worry about. But so basically what I'm doing is I'll pick a spot and then I'll try to just go straight down. And I've got my elbow kind of resting on the splash guard. Wherever you can get some extra stability, just get that extra stability. And I've got my left hand, my thumb is right up against my right hand's thumb, helping it get another point of contact for a little extra stability. And you'll see every once in a while my tool will like waver, and that's because I'm just not holding it with too tight of a grip because I don't want it to catch. And so I am just allowing the clay to pull it every once in a while, knowing that I can right it. And if you had your piece strapped in with the Giffen grip, you wouldn't have to worry about it as much. You could have a firmer grip and not have to worry about things. But with there's just literally nothing holding this in place. So I kind of gotta be a little more gentle. So anyway, just to talk about the foot a little bit. So where I'm trimming now is the place where I usually see my students go through their pot, if they go through it, I should say. And the reason that it tends to happen in this area is because usually that's the area where the student opened it and then they brought the clay out and then they brought it up. And that out to up wasn't a gradual progression. It was just, I'm going to open it to its depth. I'm going to bring the base out, and then I'm going to start pulling up. And what that leaves you is a U-shaped bottom on the inside. And if you have a U shape on the inside of your piece, you have to trim a U shape on the outside. With me, I'm going to be trimming a more oval shape, something that's rounder. And the reason I can do that is because I threw a round shape on the inside. So when I finished opening it, I opened it to a certain depth, and then instead of coming out and then up, I came out and up at the same time, so it was a curve. And I like having rather narrow feet because it just makes it look lighter and more elegant. But you do have to worry about the piece just being, you know, unstable and tipping over a little too easily. So one of the ways that I help compensate and mitigate the chance that it will be unstable or that will get knocked over is right underneath my foot, I do this little undercut. And the undercut is good for a lot of reasons. I'll get into in just one moment. Before I do it, I just want to give you guys a clearer picture of what this undercut is looking like. I think I'm actually going to go a little narrower with this foot. I don't want to go too narrow because then instead of elegant looking, it's just going to look unstable. All right, so I've got this nice tall foot, and in it, I'm going to make this little undercut. And this undercut is great because by trimming out this little area, I get more curve. There's just a little bit of extra space of the clay swooshing in. But I also get a little bit of extra width where I need it for stability's sake, which is like, right where it's going to sit on the table. And so this is a great way to make it so that, you kind of maximize stability while also maximizing, elegance and lightness of look because of having this kind of narrow spot and this nice long curve. This one's actually a little lumpy on the bottom. I think this was probably the last set when it was like midnight and I was pooped. So also what this undercut does is it makes it so that when you go to glaze it, you can just grab it by the foot. It's like a little, gives you something to hold on to. And you can just dip it in a bucket of glaze and you'll have a nice secure thing to hold on to. Also then when it goes in the kiln, let's say the glaze runs a little bit more than you expected. Maybe you just put it on a little thicker than you meant to, or the glaze got a little too hot, or it's a glaze that you're unfamiliar with and still learning how thick of a coat is too thick. Basically what will happen in the kiln is as your glaze is running down your piece, this will act like a little reservoir to kind of catch some of it before it runs off. And so it gives you a little bit of extra leeway in that regard too. So you'll see on a lot of my, production where I have this undercut for basically all of those reasons. I think it's good for aesthetics. It's good for production because it gives you something to hold on to and make glazing go smoother. And it also just mitigates risk. So I was talking about, stability and before. Another thing that I like doing on these is I usually won't trim all the clay out of this area that I think I can, just to leave a little bit of extra bottom weight. Not so much that someone's going to pick it up and think that it's heavy, but just something so that, if you leave it on your kitchen table and you've got a cat that, just decides to rub up against it, if the cat really wants to knock it over, the cat will still knock it over, but just, making it so that it's a little less likely to happen. It's going to require a little more force. So I just want to make sure this is nice even curve. Metal rib is really good for this. But I'm just using this tool right now. And it's really important, if you're sitting down at the wheel and you're kind of looking over your piece, you got to like roll back in your chair or something and get like a good perspective of the silhouette. Right. One other last thing that I want to point out is I trimmed more here rather than in the middle. And that's because my inside is round. So obviously I have to make sure that that spot isn't sticking up too much. And I want to make sure that if I put something flat over, I can see light all the way through. But because my inside is round, I like to make it so that my outside mimics that roundness. And so you'll see this come up. It's almost like this curve continues on into here. So the last thing that I'm going to do is, you can see with this stonework clay body, there's all this grog in here that's kind of made all these little pits. So you can take the sponge and smooth them out, but really what makes it so that it looks like the original thrown surface is if you start with this, and then you just take some sort of flexible rib. A metal rib will also work, but I've got a rubber one. And you just hold it against it so that you're not scraping anything away, you're just compressing everything in, almost like you're burnishing it. And that'll make it so that that surface is much closer to what you originally had when you threw it. And then I'll just kind of soften all the little hits on the foot also. And that's that. And even though it's difficult, whether it's a vase or a pitcher or whatever, you do want to try to make it so that you can dry these upside down. Sometimes I like just taking a bucket and wringing it with a towel, putting it in upside down, kind of like how it is in this truck. But anyway, I'm going to let this foot dry for a little bit, and then I'll pull the handle. Hey everyone, thanks for joining me for the final step. So here I'll be pulling a handle. We've got it trimmed. It's dried out a pretty healthy amount. Step one is I talked about how, sometimes these edges get a little frayed. Once they're this hard, like leather hard, like after I've trimmed it, I'll just take a sponge and I'll gently run over them. This will help knock down the sharpest edges so that, again, it's less likely to chip, but it won't do that much other than just a little bit of cosmetic work. So you'll still have a fairly sharp edge so that it pours really well. And when I'm done pulling the handle, I'm actually going to flip this upside down, and I'm just going to lay out a towel on a table and just let this rest. And this is strong enough where it will be able to carry, the whole weight without getting completely distorted. All right, so all attachments, the most important thing is scoring and slipping. And so scoring, as you all know, I'm sure, is just making a bunch of scratchy marks in the clay. And I would always advise doing a larger area than you think you need, because you can always just smooth it out later. But if you don't score a big enough place, you're going to have some big issues with your handle holding onto the body in the first place, and that's a much more difficult problem to solve. So do a good job, score a lot. Kind of want something like that. All right, and while that's sitting there looking pretty, for the handle, so I'll just take a lump of clay, I'll get it into a ball, and I do a fair amount of shaping before I actually start pulling it. So I'll make it into kind of like an icicle shape, and then I'll make it into a bit of a candy corn shape. So I've got my thumb and middle finger, running down the sides, just pinching it so that it tapers in terms of this direction as well as that direction. And the best analog really is just like a candy corn that you would see for Halloween. Had a little more than I needed, so I can just take that off. What's nice about this too is if it is too big, you can just cut some off the bottom and you still have the right shape. All right, so this is about ready now. I'll glop on a bunch of slip. Make sure that there's no little air pockets. I want to make sure my slip has gotten into all the little scratches that I made. And even though, I'm going to be having slip and dunking my hand in water, I clean my hands off fairly frequently. Sometimes it's just on my pants. But again, if you don't want to have fingerprints all over the place, you don't want to have something that's clean, you want relatively, clean hands for much of this. So let's make sure that it's on straight. If this was like a coffee mug or something, I'd get my hand on the inside so I could brace it. But hand can't really fit inside of there. And so I've got it stuck on, as you can see. And now I just want to make sure it's straight and also just kind of massage the point where it attaches. Get it to kind of compress in on itself a little bit so that I have a nice strong attachment. And if I end up squeezing this narrower so that it's a candy corn shape, but there's an indent right where it attaches, I'll just remake the candy corn, pinching it in everywhere else, because I want it to be completely gradiated. If you've ever had a situation where you were pulling your handle and then right where it was attaching, it just started getting thin and it stretched out and it came off. The easiest way to make it so that doesn't happen is by just making sure that where it's connected, it's nice and thick. And it is kind of this tapered triangle shape. All right, so now I've got a nice candy corn shape that's directly opposite of my spout, and now I can start pulling it. So the one thing that you want to do is if I'm working on top of the wheel that I use for throwing, and always, 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 always just shut off your wheel. Because you may not mean to, but it may be someone else in the class, or something may happen and someone may step on your pedal and send your piece flying. So just always shut the wheel off. All right. So now I've got, the point of attachment nice and groomed. And now while I'm holding this, if I can, I kind of want to use gravity, my advantage, and make it so that gravity is always pulling this straight down. So when I'm holding it and I'm looking at it, I want to make sure the spout is essentially straight up. And my hand is not symmetrical. So I'll squeeze it lightly from one side, and then I'll flip it around and squeeze the other side. So half the time, the inside of my pointer finger knuckle is right on the top of the handle, and half the time it's right on the bottom. And because I have this nice candy corn shape, a lot of what I'm doing is just kind of smoothing out and stretching out what I've already got. And it's already kind of in the right shape. Right. Just like that, we're done with pulling it at least. So the next thing I like to do is I like having this nice thumb thing. And you'll notice that when I set this down, I try to make it so that gravity was always pulling it this way. I didn't have it sideways to make it tilt to the side. You do want to think about that. All right, so now I'm gonna basically shove my thumb in and kind of shovel up a little bit and then kind of, massage it around, maybe press down a little bit. Press down, shovel up a little bit. I'll push that in a little bit more. And so that gives me the start of that thumb indent. And then I'll go back to this way so that I can use gravity my advantage, keeping my handle straight. And I'll make it a little wider. Massage it with my thumb, make sure that it's exactly how I want. And you can do even more cleaning up after you're done with the handle and you've let it dry for a little bit. But you just want basically the generally right shape. All right, and then very gentle when I set it down. Then I will just figure out where I want to attach it. So with something like this, I kind of want to be able to have someone get their whole hand in there, but it's going to shrink, so I need some nice clearance. Again, just score and slip a larger area than you think you need. Yeah, that looks good. So you always want to keep in mind that it is going to shrink. So if you don't have enough space, that can obviously be a problem. Keep in mind that it is going to shrink. And again, you saw when I picked it up, it stayed on the same axis. I didn't tilt it to the side. That is like one of the number one most important things to keeping your handle straight. So I did a good job, making sure this attachment was really good. Do the same thing on the bottom. And with a lot of the cosmetic stuff, you can just let it dry for a little bit and then do it. But while it's wet, you really want to get the compression in really good. So the one other thing that I'm going to do is I like giving this a little bit more lift. So I'm going to take my thumb and kind of push up there. And that'll give it a little bit more lift. And when I set it down and have it dry upside down, it'll basically be the perfect curve. That's basically it, folks. Thanks a lot for watching. You guys are great. Hope you all make a lot of nice pictures. Have a good one.